I'm stressed. I can't find socks to match my prom suit. I'm stressed. I have an essay due at 11:59 tonight, and all I have is a list of hyperlinks. I'm stressed because I have 50 students and 50 math tests to grade, but I also have to pick up groceries, fill the car with gas, and get the kids. Now, while these aren't my stressors currently, I can almost guarantee that some people in this audience have experienced these stressors at some point in their lives. I've experienced stress too. Around 3 years ago, I started my own organization and nonprofit, Rightfully Hers. Starting Rightfully Hers required working under deadlines, constantly recruiting volunteers, and organizing events. It was uncharted territory for me, and starting something of my own pushed me out of my comfort zone, just like playing a hard tennis match did or performing on stage did. But before I get into any of this, what is stress? Stress, as defined by the NIH, is a period of emotional or mental tension resulting from adverse or demanding circumstances. When we play the deciding point of a game or perform on stage or try to meet a deadline that feels too soon, we feel that stress. During these moments, some of us make mistakes that we never would, hesitate, or experience a sudden lack of faith. Let's get into the neurology of stress, and I promise I'll try to make this as interesting as I possibly can. Imagine your brain as a bustling city, all of its parts represented by little stores and restaurants and large retail malls. We'll call it Brain City. That stress you feel? Science says it acts as rush hour traffic, clogging up neural pathways and disrupting the flow of information. Because of this traffic, our breathing rate and our heartbeat and our swearing increases. But how? The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal system, or the HPA for short, is our body's response program to stress. But for the sake of my analogy, let's consider it akin to Brain City's emergency services, sending hormone helpers cortisol, adrenaline, and serotonin to the site of the traffic. The traffic first hits the amygdala, which is Brain City's emotional signaling center, before moving on to the hypothalamus. Any neuroscience takers out there probably know that the hypothalamus is the command center of the autonomic nervous and hormone control system, or Brain City's very own traffic government. It is this traffic government that controls and assists in the regulation of our breathing, our heartbeat, and our sweating. It can also make our hair stand on end, like this poor cat here. This spiraling body response is what affects performance. As proven by the Yerkes-Dodson law, the relationship between stress and performance can be demonstrated by an inverted U-shaped curve. At low levels of stress, performance is suboptimal due to lack of incentive. As stress increases to a moderate level, performance has a trend of improvement as individuals become more motivated. However, the curve changes when we reach what is called chronic stress. Chronic stress is an umbrella term for feeling pressured or overwhelmed over a longer period of time. It can contribute to emotional volatility, sleep problems, and even has a link to heart disease. So, put simply, chronic stress can hurt you, but a moderate level of stress, of course, when dealt with properly, can actually help you reach your full potential. So, before I move on to the most important part of my talk, I'd like to do a quick poll, and this will require audience participation, so please listen carefully to my next two questions. My first question is, and just by a show of hands, how many people here believe they've experienced some amount of stress over the past year? By a show of hands. Yeah, pretty much all of us. So, how do we deal with this stress? I'll start with what you shouldn't do. By a show of hands, how many people have ever procrastinated before? Yeah, we're all guilty of it. And it seems like the easiest thing to do, to momentarily put off our stress. But that's not necessarily true. In my research, I looked at multiple interventions, including one done by the American Psychological Association, which modeled the negative effects of avoidance coping, which is a broader term for procrastination. The study looked at 1,200 participants, around 500 men and 700 women, who were all asked about their coping mechanisms with stress, and who all reported avoidance coping as their largest coping mechanism. These participants, in addition to facing sleep problems and a severe decline in mental health, also experienced more acute and chronic life stressors over the next 4 years of their life. So now that we've established procrastination, which all of us do, isn't exactly the best thing for our stress levels or our health, here's an intervention that might guide you in a better direction, just like it guided me. Stanford health psychologist Kelly McGonigal pointed out a study of 30,000 participants tracked over 8 years, who were all asked, just like I asked you, how much stress they'd experienced over the past year, and then whether they believed stress was bad for them. This study looked at publicly available death records, and what it found was that people with high levels of stress had a 43% increased chance of dying. Now, before anyone who has experienced a high level of stress freaks out, this number is only true for people with high levels of stress who also believed stress was bad for them. In fact, people with high levels of stress who had a positive association with stress had no increased chance of dying at all. And they had the lowest risk of dying in comparison to any other group in the study, including those with relatively little stress. Now, McGonigal pointed out that 182,000 deaths resulted from stress-related illnesses over those 8 years. If this number is true, which it is, that would make just the belief that stress is bad for you the 15th largest cause of death in the United States over 8 years, above Parkinson's disease and prostate cancer. Let me repeat that. That would make just the belief that stress is bad for you the 15th largest cause of death in the United States. That's huge. So what does this tell us? This tells us that it isn't necessarily stress that is bad for you. It is the combination of having a lot of stress and believing that stress is bad that can harm your health. So what if we tried to develop a positive association with stress? What if we looked at the physical response, the clammy hands and the pounding heartbeat as a method of energizing the body to prepare it for something amazing? There are a plethora of studies on why stress is good for us. So what if we looked at stress not as a clogging mechanism in Brain City, disrupting the flow of information, but reorganizing it? What if we embrace stress as a part of our lives? So, I want to emphasize that I'm not saying you should chase after stress or go out of your way to make it a part of your life, because stress is hard and we all have different limits. I am saying that if stress happens to come into your life from a factor you can't control, then you decide whether you let it make all your decisions or laugh in its face and show it who's boss. Just to provide a bit of context as well, this past week I had 5 back-to-back exams, both AP and IB. I had cabaret and dress rehearsals for cabaret, and I had this TED Talk to prepare for, on top of all my homework. And I dealt with it by believing that the stress I was experiencing was good for me, and by using other techniques that had worked for me in the past. So I engaged in mindfulness, I spent time with family, I watched a movie, played tennis, whatever works for you, because everyone is different. I'd like to end with one of my favorite quotes by a Scottish essayist and historian named Thomas Carlyle. No pressure, no diamonds. What he explains is that without stress, without pressure, we may learn, but never to our full potential. So, even if you forget everything I just talked about today, please have one takeaway: that we can change the hardwired belief that stress is bad for us. We can change the way we cope with it, and we have the power. While it may come with a bit of discomfort, it is worth it in the long run. Thank you.